Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. As always, before we start the show, I do have to plug our Patreon. I know everybody probably skips forward through this, but if you could just stick with me, I would appreciate it very much. As I say always, the Patreon is how we keep the show going. It's how we do it week in, week out. It's our only real monetary source, so it is vital to being able to do what we do. If you can pop over to Patreon/Nordic Mythology Podcast, you can see all the benefits you get on there. Mainly the bonus show we do every week with our guests. It's an extra 20 minutes, 40 minutes, sometimes an extra hour. It can be another whole podcast that we do with our guests, and we just ask questions. We cover topics we've missed. Sometimes they're a little more lighthearted. You get access to our Discord chat on there. You get early access to things. Hopefully, we're going to be doing some side shows as well in the future. So yeah, just go have a look on there. It starts from £3 a month. It's really kind of affordable, and it does help us out. Other than that, 5-star rating, positive review wherever you get your podcast. And then also you can watch all the episodes on YouTube. You can also watch them live on YouTube. And I think that's it. Let's get into today's show. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a topic that we've never covered on the podcast before. So in 260 shows, this is a first. And our guest, last time, he was amazing. A lot of people loved the episode. So there might be a person missing today. That is Mags. She is at a concert today. So couldn't make it. But it's myself and Howard. So it's Howard Williams. Howard is a professor of archaeology at the University of Chester and blogs/vlogs as Archaeodeath. His research focuses on the early medieval period with special interests including cemeteries, a man after my own heart, carved stone monuments, as well as exploring border themes in archaeology and heritage of death and memory. Howard, thank you very much for coming back.
Hello, lovely to be here again. It's wonderful to see you, and I look forward to sharing some thoughts with our audience. It's fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So last time we covered hogbacks. If anybody listening to this hasn't heard that episode, please do go and check these out. They are a fascinating, I guess, gravestone, if we're going to go with it. If we conclude they are a gravestone, then they're an amazing thing.
They are. And we may be touching on them today because one of the images we might be discussing is on a hogback or a possible hogback. But we're on to a different topic today, aren't we? So it's fun.
So we got that started on a good tone. It's a possible image on a possible hogback, which I think
I use possible way too much. I'm an archaeologist where everything's possible but never probable or never certain.
But I think that sums up everything to do with the Norse zeitgeist. Is that the right word? But the whole thing is just summed up so perfectly with a possible image on a possible hogback, but we're going to talk about it for an hour and a half.
Exactly. With lots of maybes and could have beens and
but that's what's fun. Yeah. So we're going to talk about Weland the Smith.
Oh, yes.
And I think there will be so many people who don't or haven't heard of this character because unless I'm an anomaly, that I got to about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago, never even hearing of Weland the Smith, and he's quite big in the UK, right?
It's an interesting one because he's rarely considered in terms of modern spiritualities. He's rarely considered a god or a deity. He gets called different things in different books and different contexts. He gets called a mythical figure, a legendary figure. He gets called a god, a spirit, a elf. He gets different kind of descriptors. And so part of that is because we don't really know. Our sources are a little bit vague. Is he married to a Valkyrie, a swan maiden? There's a lot of the story we have is clearly part of a bigger set of stories that are completely lost, that tell the origin and nature of this character, his relationship with his brothers and his wife. And so we pick up only in two very late sources, the poetic Edda, the Lay of Volund, Volund the sort of a poem about this character. And then we have the Theodoric Saga of Bern, a mid 13th century Icelandic source, which gives a sort of different version and a longer version of the exploits of Volander, as he is in the Norse tradition, and his brother Egil. So we have those sources, and then we have various other references, partial allusions to this character in other sources. So we have in the Old English poem Deor, we have a reference to the sufferings of Weland. In the Old English poem Beowulf, which many people will be
Mm-hmm.
aware of, we hear that Beowulf has a mail shirt that's Wayland made, and that there's a question of, does that mean just like top clobber, or does
Mm-hmm.
it mean
Yeah.
they actually saw it as made by Wayland himself? Is it so cool, the kind of cool stuff you'd expect Wayland to make, or is it something very specific? But and in Waldair, another Old English poem, we have this reference to the imprisoned Smith, and this idea of a suffering because he's a prisoner as well, you see. And we'll come on to
Mm-hmm.
those are the sources. But I mean, I don't know if you want me to go into the story itself yet, or if there's something else you wanted to pitch in before we do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We will get into it. So before we do, one of the things I wanted to kind of highlight was I came across Wayland because there is the stone in the Leeds Cathedral. I think it's in the Leeds Cathedral.
Yeah, yeah,
There is a huge cross that apparently has, I've not had a chance to see it yet actually, but has the story on there. And obviously I'm not far from Leeds. So when I
yeah,
found it, I was like, this is interesting. I'm gonna have to do some research on this fella that I've not heard of that has ties to the Anglo-Saxons to
yeah.
a quick Google search, you get the Wikipedia page, which I learned recently isn't too bad of a place to look at for this
No,
stuff.
it's
So I'm
not too
going
bad
with
as a
it.
starting point for many things. It can take you in the wrong
Yeah.
direction sometimes, but
So we have names for him in Old English, Old Norse, Old Frisian, German, Old High German, Old French, Proto Germanic. I think that's it on here. So
sounds about.
he's been around a little bit.
He's been around a long time, and that's the other interesting thing is we have these sources from the 10th to 13th centuries. I mean, Alfred the Great writing his version of the Consolidation of Philosophy by Boethius when he's doing his, he translates Fabricus for Wayland. So it's clearly in the late 9th century we have already a deep ancient story that was known across northern Europe and possibly
Mm-hmm.
in western and southern Europe too, blending with the classical tradition of a famous smith like Vulcan, who is who is
Mm-hmm.
who is famed for his the things he makes, so much so that a king captures him, hamstrings him, and so he can't. He's crippled, and and imprisons him on an island to control his artisan, his skill, so that so
That's
Wayland in the story becomes
that's
a
an
prisoner.
awful. Sorry, I was going to say that's an awful thing to do to anybody. If they don't,
Yeah,
if anybody doesn't know what hamstringing is, it's I guess effectively the same as cutting somebody's Achilles
yeah.
tendon. That idea of cutting the hamstring so you can't run away, you can't walk. So Wayland is a master smith. He's captured, hamstrung, and forced to make items for the king.
And in the Leovolon, there's this kind of hint that there's a backstory that his brothers go off. They all have swan maiden wives, and these brothers go off in search of the wives, and he stays behind and goes to sleep, which doesn't you could take as a bit of a I'll just whatever, she'll be back, or you
Mm-hmm.
can
Yeah,
see
yeah,
it
yeah.
as some other we don't really have the full story, but yeah, because he's alone and his brothers have left him, he's captured, he's put on this island. And so you have this really vivid landscape, that must be imagined by the people telling the story as some kind of northern landscape of islands and forest and lakes where he is imprisoned in isolation and forced to work for this king Nidad or Nidad, who is the baddie.
Mm-hmm.
He's the baddie of the story, and it's a story therefore about bad kingship and bad lordship of a lord who exceeds his power, tries to capture and control something that would have been very smiths, precious metal smiths, gold workers, garnet workers as well, stone workers, precious stone workers, would have been something that kings and lords would want the services of, but they were also potentially powerful and disruptive. And so you have this kind of story speaks to this problem that all early medieval or late Iron Age rulers faced is, how do you bring these artisans, with their skills, give them the rich resources they require, but how do you stop your rivals also accessing that patronage? How do you control this? And obviously, I suppose the idea is Nidad is a sort of a king who takes it too far, who overreaches his power, because so much of what we learn about late Iron Age, early medieval kingship is about hospitality, as we know from the gods themselves and the sagas. It's all about coercion mixed with the carrot and the stick. Coercion, but also hospitality. Coaxing people into relationships that bind you into obligations. But artisans, these smiths, are outside of that easy control. Therefore, smiths in legends and myths across cultures are often troublesome characters, potentially dangerous characters. And Nidad overreaches, basically disables his smith so that he can work for him. But of course, Weland spends his time waiting to wreak his Ruengi, and that's the whole story. Is that Weland is an anti-hero, if you like. He's kind of I like to describe him as like Marv, if you know Sim City. He's like a big. He's violent. He's unpredictable, and he got really pissed off by being literally imprisoned, and so he takes the long road to revenge and conducts himself in some pretty gruesome ways to enact his revenge.
In a very typical saga-esque fashion, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So, there's no way, if you want to really, in terms of you imagine not one audience, this is a story that was around for centuries and centuries. So you could imagine this is a story that would have been told and retold for very different reasons at different times. But this was a story that would have captured the imagination of early medieval aristocratic halls, because it threatened their very world, like Grendel and in the poem Beowulf. Comes into the hall at night, rips up the warriors, and all that kind of stuff. This is a story that would strike fear into any aristocratic household or royal household, because it speaks of the utter revenge. If you piss off the wrong people, if you overreach your power, this is the worst kind of revenge that could happen. And the worst revenge you can receive is not death yourself, but the end of your bloodline. So Nidad has his bloodline ended in two gruesome ways. Because what happens first is that the sons of the king are drawn to the island to see the treasures that Weland makes, and Weland takes the opportunity to murder them brutally and bury their bodies under the smithy, and then to use them.
Does it go into detail on how he does that? Because I imagine as a man who's been hamstrung, that's not going to be very easy. He's kind of stuck in one spot, I guess, unless he...
Yeah, so he is isolated on this island, and therefore he uses his cunning to draw them in. In the Lay of Voland, in the Poetic Edda, it says, "Early called one man to the other, brother to brother, let's go see the rings. They come to the chest, demanding the keys." So it's almost like they are demanding to take Voland's best artifacts. The evil intention was patent when they looked inside. Then we don't get the detail. We just get he cut off the heads of these young cubs, and under the mud of the smithy he laid their limbs, and their skulls, which were under the hair, he chased outside with silver. So this is from Caroline Larrington's Oxford World Classics translation. And basically what he does is he turns their skulls into silver drinking cups.
Well, it's pretty metal thing to do.
Oh yeah, but, this is the ultimate metal. This is Weland is ultimate metal, and which is why I'm surprised that it's probably too gruesome for Hollywood audiences to ever give it a film version. But it's not for the faint-hearted.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'm trying to think how he could have tackled these two. And all I can think of, and I don't know why this has come to mind, this kind of elaborate thing, because you said they look down into a
Mm,
chest and they're looking
mm.
for their rings, that he's set up a sort of booby chest that's got maybe like a blade along the lid as it shuts, and he's kind of just sat there waiting for them to look in and peer down, and then they pulls his little bit of string, and the lid snaps shut
Oh
like a
wow,
mouse
you've
trap,
got.
and
Well,
the heads are off.
I think we just have to say when they do the Hollywood film version, this is what will happen. Okay, we've decided now. This is
I
definitely the
hope so.
version that's going. I love
As long
that.
as I get a writer's credit.
Yeah, you should, but but this is the kind of thing that there's lots of gaps in the story, but the idea is that they're lured, or they overstep their mark again. They not only is their father, but they've come alone seemingly, and their confidence, their arrogance has betrayed them. We don't know, but we can imagine various versions thereof where they come into the smithy, into this dark space, try to demand access to the treasures that are being made for their father, and their reward is to be murdered and their skulls turned into silver cups. Which, of course, what's the point in doing that if Voland doesn't then send those silver vessels to the king as gifts? And what's the
Mhm.
point in doing that? I'm jumping ahead to the end of the story. What's the point in sending gifts made from the son's skulls to the father if you don't then later fly in your flying machine to the hall and say, look what I've done, mate. You've been drinking from your son's skulls. No, 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 no,
Yeah,
and then fly off. So there's no point in doing it if you don't actually then go and in the legendary world of the story, you don't go and then brag about it. It's like one of those one of these Hollywood films. I keep mentioning Hollywood films, but it's a kind of where what is your plot? How are you going to destroy the world? I will tell you because you're going to die anyway.
yeah.
It's one of those
It's the
moments.
James Bond villain, isn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Who typically usually over explains the
yeah.
way
Yes,
he's going to
yeah,
kill James Bond as James Bond is escaping.
exactly. So it's not only that, but then he makes from their eyes, he makes he makes gems, and they go to the unnamed queen, and he makes teeth from their teeth. He makes brooches which he gives to their sister Bodvild, or
It's resourceful,
Bjordhild.
isn't it?
And so the sister, so he's giving to the sister, the mother, and the father the bodies of the two
Hmm.
brothers and son, which is pretty, as you say, metal and grim. But so he's basically killed off. He's killed off the bloodline of the king, and to add insult to injury, he's making them use their bodies as trinkets. So he's making them. He's literally making them swallow down their own medicine. They made him a prisoner, and he's giving it back many times over. He's killed off the bloodline, the male line, the patriline, and he's basically given back the as gifts, as cursed gifts, back
Hmm.
to the family these objects. But that's the nice bit of what he does. But we can
That's,
get.
that's a nice bit. It does make me wonder. I mean, I could be looking for plot holes, I guess, and I'm sure there are a few. That the king must be a really shitty dad, because I feel like his sons have gone against his will. Yeah, fair enough. But then they must have disappeared, and then he's got these cups, and he's never once thought, I wonder where my two sons are. They went to visit Weland, and now I've got these two cups that you probably can tell are bone. Um, that maybe should have been, and also I feel like he, again, maybe he's not keeping too close of an eye, but he also knows the materials he's given to Wayland. Wayland isn't going out and getting his own
Silver, yeah.
materials, is it?
Yeah.
He's kind of got what's given to him.
Yeah, so you can again, we can fill in the gaps in many ways. Maybe they had rich objects on them, like silver rings that were part of that, used on their own bodies. Maybe
Mhm.
I don't know. But there's huge gaps, but that's the first stage. The second stage is he lures, or has the daughter of the king comes to his smithy to repair a ring that he made for his wife, for Wayland's wife, for Volander's wife, and she's got the ring and she wants it repaired, and he seduces her. With getting her to imbibe alcohol, and in the classic Victorian style of language that we want to use, he seduces the king's daughter, and she is with child rapidly at some point where she leaves weeping, and when he then makes his third stage of revenge, which is making a flying machine and flying to the king's hall and saying, not only have I killed your sons and you're drinking from their skulls and your wife's got their gems as their eyes as gems and your daughter's been had brooches made from their teeth, but by the way, you've got a grandson and he's my son, and therefore your entire kingdom and line via your daughter has been usurped by me, which is a polite way of saying I've done some really horrible things to your daughter. I'm
Hmm.
sure not fully consensual, that's
I'm
I think
sure
really
not.
that's the point is he is it's the worst revenge, and that's the thing that I think people need to remember is in this legendary story, the ultimate anxiety for royalty is the ripping of the entire bloodline from of your future from you. It's not about your
Hmm.
past, although this is a story about a mythical time and a legendary past, but it's about anxieties about the future, as a lot of these stories are. They're about the actions and the sequence of events that can unravel and leave you in the worst kind of circumstances. So Wayland's a lovely chap, and I'm sure like many a good story, if we understood his backstory better, I bet we would understand what made him such a, But the idea is he's a vicious
Yeah.
murderer and rapist who uses those as retributive violence against his imprisoner.
Hmm. Yes. It, it's like all of the sagas, isn't it? There seldom is a good A. Like
No,
an out and out good guy. It's but then again, that's I guess an allegory for life that everything is complicated. There isn't nobody out there, even probably the best people there nobody is wholly 100% good. Everybody makes mistakes. Not saying some of the things that Wayland did are just mistakes, but everybody has faults, and that's kind of what these sagas are. Is that there isn't just this Prince Charming who is just light and good and does no wrong ever. That everybody is good and bad and has evil in them, and it's this
yeah.
whole spectrum of humans.
Well, I mean, the Leovold in the Poetic Edda leaves us with, I mean, Voland rose in the air, flying off in his flying machine like a Tony Stark, laughing, um, and we're left with the scene of Bodvild, the daughter, who is left alone, admitting to her inability to strive against him. And the last line is, "I was not able to strive against him." So you're left with this kind of really disturbing end to the poem of the daughter's, you know, um, being losing her, her seducer, if you want to put it that way. Her seducer is flying off, having committed his revenge, leaving this mighty hall with its mighty king and queen, with no sons and a daughter awaiting her fate, which is left
Hmm.
unclear what that would be.
Yeah,
And
that's
it's really grim.
as if you take the emotion out of it, and the as horrible as this sentence may be, that especially if you put yourselves back in a time 1,000 years ago,
Yes.
there's a decision there for the king to make.
Yeah.
As if as brutally and as cold as it is, he has a decision where he's lost his sons. I would assume probably as maybe of age where he can't have more sons.
Yeah.
Um, he now has his daughter who is pregnant from you know not under circumstances that he would want by somebody who would not want a tie to the kingdom. So there are these things where what do you do? Do you allow her to give birth and
Mm.
willing to kind of have some claim, especially as a male, I assume would have some claim to the kingdom, or other means which are kind of not nice to think of, especially through modern eyes.
So we have this, potential, that there's a follow-up story. There is also really from Thiedrich Saga we have the idea that Weland himself has a famous father in the form his father is Wada or Wade, and who is a very elusive figure that goes through all the way through Chaucer. And there's this idea in Old English and in Middle English that there's an ancient hero giant called Wade, and we never really get the full story of Wade. And so, are there further stories that would associated with giants and monsters, and that would the son be of his line of semi-monstrous? Because Wayland transforms into a kind of flying machine like a bird. He has associations with bears and wrapping himself in bear skin. So as Torrens Zachrisson says, who's written about the Wayland story in the Norse context, there's a lot of Sami coded symbolism to Weland or Voland as a smith, as a magician, as a shapeshifter. So there is a lot of potential. There's potentially a lot of other stories out there that we've lost that give the backstory and the fate of Weland's offspring. But yeah, it's an intriguing one.
That's a thought's just come across my my little head there, that I guess to an everyday person 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years, whatever time period you're in, when it comes to somebody like a smith, somebody blacksmithing, it is a form of magic. You have somebody who can turn, if you go from the start process, a rock, and yes, through the different processes they're probably not going to see, but they start with a rock and they end up with this beautiful sword.
Yeah.
And in that process, you also get to watch them hitting this thing with a hammer, putting it in a fire, there's sparks coming off it. And you're like, that, what's more magical than that? It's only because we understand what happens, but to somebody back then, they'd be like, this is unbelievable.
And across the globe, from the Bronze Age onwards, when metals start to be, worked, we see this magical association and sometimes shamanic associations of transformation and journeying to do, in spiritual journey linked to the fiery transformation of things, the making of things, the requirement of different resources, of special fuels, of special skills, of hidden knowledge. And so, when we get to the late Iron Age, early Middle Ages, we've got multiple smiths, of course, from the Norse mythological tradition. We have Regin the Smith as well. We have into the early Christian world. The Christians didn't denounce all this. They were lapping up these stories and incorporating, because many early bishops were artisans too and were metalsmiths too. So this was this medium of making things for the holy and to honor the one true God from a Christian perspective, but also was taken from these existing traditions of artisanship, linked to secret knowledge, linked to the creation of things. Just how did they make that? Composite things, small things, intricate things. So power can be in small objects as well as in grand metalwork and great edifices. And so that's one of the fascinating things about Weland is we can, and this is against my natural instinct, we can chart visually into really far back, earlier than these Icelandic sources, where Weland is being represented. And when I say it's against my instinct, it's because there's a natural instinct to think, wow, we've got these Christian era Icelandic sources. Yeah, sure, some of that stuff goes back to the Viking Age. We can work out some of the older poems are probably 9th, 10th century. But whoa, we've got now evidence, we've got visual evidence we can link to that Weland story that goes back to at least the 5th, 6th century, and then but certainly from the late 7th, 8th centuries. And that is so cool because it shows us that pagan and Christian alike throughout Northern Europe are aware of this story. And we have a really interesting object that has a coin with had a solidus of the Emperor Theodosius II, uses it as a model. But this is from the late 6th, early 7th century, which has in runes on it Volandu in Anglo-Frisian, and so this is sort of mimicking a Byzantine coin.
This one.
Oh, well done. Yes. So
magic.
we have,
see.
This is the power of technology. Yeah, so this may hint at that deep time origins of the Wayland story throughout different parts of continental Europe that precede that Scandinavian tradition. And of course, we also have the whalebone casket, which is annoyingly one of the most, not the only stupidly named archaeological object, because there's a long list of dumb names to archaeological objects, but the Franks casket, which you can see in the British Museum, which is
Mm-hmm.
named the Franks casket because it's nothing to do with the Franks, but it's to do with the British Museum curator, Augustus Franks. And so they named it after him, just to make it
I
easy for
didn't.
everyone.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Just,
It's like the
I
Bayeux
just
tapestry isn't a
assumed.
tapestry. The Franks casket isn't anything to do with the Franks, and the Buddha bucket from Osseberg doesn't have the Buddha on it. It's one of those. It's all these silly things that are there to confuse the layperson and get them confused. But yes, this is
I
the.
honestly thought it was because he was the Franks, but then why would I think any different?
Why would you?
Unless you
Because
look deeper, you just assume, wouldn't you, from the name?
you were lured in by the
Mm-hmm.
Victorian
Yeah, yeah.
naming traditions. So this is a absolutely fantastic object, right? It's made of whalebone. It has Anglo-Saxon or Old English runes on it, and it's an object probably produced in Northumbria in the 8th century as a reliquary. Although there are other interpretations of what it actually might be, but it's produced for a member of one of the Northumbrian royal house. So it may have been a for containing gifts, and this is not incidental, right? It may have been a wedding gift. That's another argument that Barbara York has suggested. So this is an object that is rich in stories on its panels. It's made from a retrieved sea monster. It's made from whalebone. And it tells
Mm-hmm.
us it is because the Old English runes on it say, I am made from a sea monster.
Oh, don't you
That's
love
not
it
the
when they
exact
do that?
translation. Sorry.
When they just don't you love it when they do that? When they just write
It's a
on
first
there.
person object. So it's one of those speaking objects that we talk about in
Mm-hmm.
the Old English tradition of it's an object that tells you its story, like the Alfred jewel, which is an estil for writing, even though in the Last Kingdom they show it as a broken object already, which misses the entire bleeding point that it was a long pointer for writing, and they in
Oh.
the TV show they have it broken. But anyway, let's not go there. But of course, it has on it Alfred had me made. So it's like that. That's a later object, but the point is, it's one of these speaking objects that tells you its story. So it
Mm-hmm.
tells us important that it's made from whalebone because it's made from an object that's monstrous, and these are other examples. But what's really amazing is the range of stories on it show the rich different traditions of the 8th century world, including the sacking of Jerusalem by Titus. It shows scenes that may be from old Germanic legend that we don't really understand. It also has Romulus and Remus suckling the she wolf, the story of the origins of Rome. But in this scene, this front
Wait,
panel, oh yeah, there's
there we go.
Romulus and
That's
Remus getting their milk
I,
from the she
I,
wolf.
I just want to say I'm flicking because I'm flicking through the pictures that are on the Wikipedia page now.
Oh yes.
I have no control over what comes next. So
Oh okay.
if anything pops up, that's on the Wikipedia page and it's not on me. I promise you.
Okay,
It's
but the previous image was of the front panel, and what's really interesting is
this
this is
one.
that's really so here we have on the viewer's right, you have the adoration of the Magi. In other words, three kings bringing their gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Myrrh is that as a kind of strange animal. Let's not go into the Monty Python, but also they bring a duck or a goose for reasons that are not quite clear. And
Do you
there's
think
the
that's where
Star of Beth.
is that where it comes from? Why they brought a goose?
Well, there's some theme here that's not quite. So you got the Christ child with JC, little baby JC there, and Mary above him, and they're just
Jeez.
sitting there, just waiting for their gifts to arrive. And they thought, well, we bought a goose, and they're going, oh, great, just what we wanted. But there may be some interesting parallel with the other panel because you have a scene on the other panel that has long been interpreted as showing the story of the Old English. This is 8th century. So this is 4.5 centuries before the Icelandic stories are written down. That shows a very oddly positioned, and that his weird stance has been suggested that the figure on the far left with the beard and is Wayland. and
Can
that
you
he is
see my
yeah,
cursor?
I can.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that is
just so
Wayland
everybody else
over
can
there.
see my cursor. Yeah.
And it tells us this is the Old English tells us this is Weland in his smithy, and what he's doing, and I think people haven't really pulled this apart carefully enough. There's ambiguity as to why there's two female figures approaching him. Some people say it's the same figure in two moments. Other people say it's the king's daughter, Bodvild or Bjordhild in the Old English tradition, receiving um, something from Weland, and that's her servant, but we don't really get that explained. This may be a different version of the story. And on the right again is another male figure, which has been interpreted as Egil wringing the necks of birds to make the feathers for the flying machine.
All
It's a
right. Okay.
foreshadowing of the whole story of what Wayland's going to be doing. So this is a version of the story where Wayland isn't alone. His brother actually comes to help him escape. And it's so again, it hints that maybe there's different versions of this story. But what I think is important is that you're in the smithy, and you can see that because you've got his hammer, his anvil. His hammer is actually hanging in midair between his two other hands. One hand is holding in the tongs the head of one of the sons. The body beneath his feet is the other corpse of the
All
son that he's
right.
murdered. So you've got like
Oh,
a
how
kind of
dark is that? I didn't
I
realize that was a
know.
head.
And so you've got here
Yeah.
sort of, obviously, if this was an actual real scene, hang on, that's my brother's head you've got in there. No, it's not. Have a
Yeah.
drink.
Yeah.
So obviously
Yeah.
this is the
Yeah.
idea is this is blurring together multiple scenes into but he's got the furnace behind him. He's got a hammer on the wall, and there's other things hanging down we don't really know. But the idea is that you've got a scene of the seduction of the king's daughter by Wayland giving her the have a drug drink, have some booze, it makes sense. Have some Madeira, right? So you have that kind of seduction scene. So this is about sexual violence. It's about in a dangerous space of the smithy and the killing of the king's sons. And people have said, well, that's like the bad giver, the gifts that are bad. Maybe even akin, maybe they're seeing Wayland as akin to Herod.
Okay.
So you could be seeing Christian equations of Wayland, this Germanic legendary figure, with Herod, who kills the innocents, the infants, the firstborn. He could be seen as like the bad gift giver, the cursed gift, the drug, the alcoholic drink that is used to instill a seduction, the making of jewels from the skull, eyes, and teeth of the king's sons, versus on the right the good gifts, the honoring of the ultimate king on earth, Jesus. Jesus is not only in Anglo-Saxon terms a Christ child, he becomes the ultimate model of lordship. So this is again, perhaps the story to be taken from this, as Richard Abels and others have argued, I think, is that you're looking at models of kingship. And it's not Wayland who's the bad guy, really. He is the instrument of retribution against bad kingship, and the daughter of the father of the woman he seduces. And this is a moral of bad kingship and bad gifts that are deserved by bad kings versus good gifts that are received by good kings, all on an object that may itself have been a gift to royalty or containing gifts that kings would give out, or so there's a real sort of visual intellectual object that is using scenes from stories, juxtaposing the morality of good and bad gifts in an object that would have been seen and talked about and used in the courts of Northumbrian Christian kings, which I think is absolutely fabulous and shows how these Germanic, these legends were circulating within Christian context and were not being seen as, were not static. They were probably being adapted for different purposes. And this is just one moment where we have a rare opportunity to see that tradition and the juxtaposition of Wayland dishing out his retribution through gifts that are cursed or bad versus the benevolence of the three kings coming to worship the ultimate Christ child, the ultimate model of Christian lordship and kingship.
It's fascinating because I think we have to try really hard to take ourselves out of our own sense of morality and our modern sense of morality, because he does some pretty awful things, but that doesn't mean that to people at the time they necessarily would have been awful things, especially under the circumstances of him being wronged in the first place. And it's that kind of thing that I think all of us probably adhere to some kind of idea of, maybe not an eye for an eye, but if somebody wrongs you, can you kind of go and eat as equal, or like in the eyes of the law, I guess, like as a reasonable person would react back. Most people would, I think, would agree that if somebody wrongs you, you can have some sort of retaliation, whether it's in the way of just telling them to fuck off, or maybe something a little bit more sinister.
Yeah.
So it's just that maybe is amplified and accepted in a previous time, where the things he did are justified because he was so wronged in the first place. He can kill the two sons, and he can kind of, unfortunately, have and do what he wants with the daughter and destroy
Yeah.
the bloodline, because in their eyes it would be justified, and that's why maybe it's not seen as a sin or a negative thing, because it's just the done thing. That's what you do. Somebody wrongs you, you kill them.
I think it's very much a different moral order, certainly to modern one, and it's one um, that literally giving an eye for an eye, giving back eyes as jewels, is a pretty stark and grim way to deal with things. But I don't think I think one of the problems we have as scholars, which you think would be beyond this, is any more than any modern theatre or Greek tragedy is seeing this as models for behaviour of how people are expected to behave. No one was going around doing these things to everyone's sons and daughters, or the whole system and world would collapse. This is supposed to be extreme. This is supposed to be excessive. It's supposed to be disturbing. And I think audiences would have found it such. I don't think people would have been going around going, yeah, that's what I'm going to be doing next week, and that'll show that it's not really supposed to be moderate, or it's supposed to be the acts of legendary characters, as with some of these saga characters who are obviously larger than life because they may have done some of the things they did, or they're conflating the stories about 5 or 6 different characters, but they loom larger than life because they are telling them that they're part of that moral code that they're speaking to.
Is that actually any different than Hollywood films? Let's take John Wick, for example.
Yeah.
Anybody who's seen John Wick, now I'm a huge dog lover, so I think John Wick's actions are equal and acceptable. I think he does what he does, but this isn't a spoiler because it's an old film. Like, it's somebody kills his dog, and he then kills an untold amount of people after that in retribution, and
Yeah.
it spirals into absolute chaos of bloodshed and murder. Now, I would say that's fair, right? You don't fuck with a man's dog, but it's that kind of idea. We have this story of complete extremes. That's not what happens.
No.
Yes, maybe he would take retribution against the person, but it wouldn't lead to hundreds dead and chaos and cars being blown up and clubs being torn apart and whatever else happens. But it is just an extreme, and it's entertainment. And as these stories would have been for everybody, they would have maybe had like a lesson in them, but it's a form of entertainment.
But then, if I may say, and I was just thinking of Django, or just another film I've just watched, Sinners, where there's an ultimate violent bloodbath, without ruining the plot of either film if you haven't seen them.
How is Sinners? I'll ask you about that after you finish your point, because I've heard really good things about it.
I did enjoy it, but it was perhaps I think people hyped it a little bit, but I thought it was really interesting and really engaging. But there is retributive violence. But I think, having said that, where we perhaps in our modern appetites want to see absolute scorched earth, Weland doesn't go and even Grendel in the Old English poem Beowulf doesn't kill everybody. Grendel targets the hall and those he finds in the hall, and his mother comes back to take revenge on one individual in the hall. Likewise, Weland as a seeking revenge is very proportionate. He doesn't slay the entire retinue of Nidad or set fire to the hall and do all sorts of other dastardly deeds. It's very specific, very calculated, and making it all the more terrifying, I feel. And so, yes, at
It's
one
at
level,
the king, isn't it?
yeah,
It's
it's about,
aimed at the king. It's
yeah,
very much
yeah, yeah. And
you wronged
everyone
me, so
else
you're
is,
the
at
one.
least in the very simplified story that we have coming down to us, no one else is touched. So at one level, you're absolutely right. It does speak very much to our fiction, but another level, it's very proportionate. It's very specific. None of this actually happened, but in terms of storytelling, it does take us to a world where even in the extremes, you have to match very carefully what your retribution is, or you could be seen, in a different light. So I think it's a very disturbing story, and it isn't of our world and our sensibilities, but it is like our world, is that we like that cathartic, retribution, to think about what could happen, and if people overstep the mark.
There's a little bit of fantasy to it too.
Yeah, I would like a
So
flying
do we?
machine, of course.
Oh, wouldn't we all? I feel like you'd suit it much more than I do.
Well,
You'd look great on a little flying machine.
we have, obviously, because of the other pieces of art we have, we know exactly what some early medieval people thought Weland's flying machine looks
Oh
like.
wow. Okay, where do I'll try and pull this up if you let me know
So
where I find that.
so we have there's a number of scenes, but the next place I would like to take you to is to a 10th century object from Uppåkra in Sweden. So that's Uppakra, and if you put in Weland Uppåkra, you might get images of the small little gilt copper alloy mount from Uppåkra that was found
Oh
in
wow. Okay. Yeah.
2011, I think it was. And it is a fantastic little object, and it speaks exactly to. Yeah, it's found in 2011. It weighs 52.6 grams. It's 7 centimeters long. I just saw it last week in the Lund
Oh, beautiful.
Archaeology Museum near Lund Cathedral. I feel very privileged. I've seen it before, but no, actually, I don't think I have seen it before. No, I saw it for the first time. Sorry, last week. I've just looked at images of it so much I forgot. So I saw it for the first time last week, and it is a unique object. But why we think, yeah. So this object is now thought, it could be, now in Norse mythology there's lots of people who transform into birds, but there's a very specific reason why this character, this piece of art, which is 2 centuries later than the Frank's casket, but is thought to represent Weland in his flying machine. So just to go through it, what we're looking at here is a possibly a helmeted. It may be he's wearing a helmet. I'm not so sure, but he's certainly got a distinctive nose, distinctive eyes, and a head. And his whole head is contorted as if he's like an eagle. He's looking upwards. His wings. He's got wings. He's tied into this. Oh, there you are. There's the drawing. That's lovely.
Yes, I found a drawing of it, which is
So you got the tail
fascinating.
feathers.
The more I look at it, the more amazing that is.
It's amazing because it actually does match up with a lot of other Bora style sort of link work that you get in Viking art of the 9th century and into the early 10th century, some of the very later stuff. But you've got it links into, it's a unique object, but some of the stylizing we find on 10th century carved stone monuments from the Isle of Man. We don't have a Weland figure from the Isle of Man, but you can see him literally. He's locked into a flying machine. It is
It's
very
like
much,
underneath it
yeah.
almost, and it is machine-esque versus I thought it would just be like a cloak with wings, and it would kind of just. That looks kind of almost steampunky in a way. If it was a real thing,
Dan, absolutely. It looks not believable. I don't know what that would mean, but it looks like people thought this through. And his wings are tied in, so he's almost in dive like a peregrine falcon. He's acting like a bird of prey. He is a violent, threatening bird. He's not a chicken or a goose or he is a raptor, right? He is like a sea eagle, an osprey. It's a very much a striking and almost believable. You can almost see the Marvel film version of this or
You
whatever.
could, yeah. Like, he's almost got a helmet on as well.
Yeah.
Like, he's got his little helmet on, and the way he's pulling the wings in looks, to me, as in, like, it could be in like a dive.
Yes,
So rather than being spread, it is that diving in, and
and remember,
he's also got little boots on.
This is a hawking culture. From the Arab world, we know that before the Viking Age, and certainly through the Viking Age, Northern Europeans were obsessed with hawking, with falconry, and they were keeping gyr falcons and peregrine falcons, and this would have spoken to that aristocratic culture, and this is really taking us into that world of it's a dive. And the reason why we like to think this is actually Weland or Volund, and particularly the version of the Theodric Saga story, is if you can look at the top of the image, you can see that the wing has 4 droplets of blood on the wing. And if you see that the wings going down, they're asymmetrical. On the right wing, there's no blood drops, but on the left wing, the top ring on the image, you can see 4 little drops of blood.
Yeah, it's not showing my cursor for some reason, but
okay.
yeah, I see them.
You see what I mean? So for those who are looking at this, it's the top wing, and there's like 4 little droplets. And in the Theodric Saga,
that's so fascinating.
In the Theodric Saga version of the story, Volund, who's called Velant in the story, is escaping in his flying device made from birds' feathers, and he says to his brother that if the king instructs you to shoot me with it, because Egil, his brother, is a archer. He's an expert archer. And I forgot to say, on one of the other scenes of the Frank's casket, you may have a scene of Egil shown there. So Egil's the archer brother.
Okay.
And the idea is that he's instructed by Nidad to fire at his brother, but because he's a clever guy, this Volund, he says, I will have a pack of the blood of a bladder of the king's son's blood under my left wing. Fire there, and it'll look like you've hit me. And then you
no
will
way does he have a blood pack like in a like a WWF match.
You couldn't make this up.
A little
So Weland is clever. He's making the flying machine, and he thinks of, right, if the king forces you to fire at me, I'll pretend to be hit, right? So he's thought it all out, and so you have this scene where Egil fires it at the left arm, and blood falls to the ground, and the winged man from Apocra seems to show 3 centuries earlier, at least, than the story is written down, that version of the tale. So this is definitely Weland. This isn't Odin. Everything's Odin, but this isn't Odin, for once.
Yeah.
This isn't Frey or any other Thor or Loki. This is Volander. And that's why we think this is a really, well, to my mind, you can always say, well, maybe not. It could be another story we don't know about, but there's another flying man. But I think we're into the realms where we have, at least for once, a reasonably confident connection between a saga, a legendary saga, not a family saga, and a far earlier archaeological object. The Frank's casket, we know, is shows that the story was not Viking. It was long before the Viking phenomenon, but here in one of the central places, one of these great magnate farms and central places of southern Scandinavia, Opokra is an amazing archaeological site. It's got a visitor centre now, and they're still excavating. They've got a cult house. They've got a great hall. This could have been this object. I should have said this. We don't know exactly what this object was. One argument is it was a nose guard of a helmet. I'm not convinced by that. I think it would be a bit of a crap nose guard. But whatever it was, other people say it could have been an applique on a shield. I don't know. But whatever it was, could be a bit of horse gear. But this is showing us that story was being shared, was being talked about, spoken, sung, and was being represented in the Viking Age. So I think that object really speaks to it. And we also have other illustrations from the Viking world, particularly Gotlandic picture stones, the Bildsteiner from the Baltic island of Gotland, also show scenes from the story of Weland the Smith. And if I don't know if you can easily pull them up, but the Ardra, so I feel like Joe Rogan here. Go pull up that image.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Don't you worry. I'll do my
Ardra
best.
8. I've got to get the hair dealt with. I can't be. I'm too hairy for Joe Rogan. But if Ardra 8 has a scene which shows the smithy and the corpses of the king's sons, and
That's on
Weland
the.
escaping on his. So if you look up Gotland picture stone, Ardra, Ardre, and then either VIII or 8, it might bring up an image of the scene on the stone. Now these are memorial stones from Gotland, from the Viking Age, from the early Viking Age. They might be a
How
bit
did you
earlier.
spell? How do you spell it?
Ardre. I don't know how you say it. I'm not very good with my speech. Ardra, Ardre.
Okay. Yeah. This looks like the one. Let me pop this up. Oh, wrong one. This one here. Is this it?
I know this is a bit fiddly, folks, but I think it'll be worth it to show you that we also have other images from Viking Age Scandinavia. Yeah, so right, it's not really easy to see on this image.
I can zoom in,
Yeah,
and
zoom into the bottom right area.
okay.
That's it. Perfect. That's the one. So what you've got here is a really weird scene that if you didn't know the story of Weland, you wouldn't understand. And this actually does not make full sense, even if you do know the story of Weland. And I'll explain why. But it's important for understanding this image before we look at the English stuff. Okay. So what you've got here is a little building which has hammers hanging down and tongs and pincers from a smithy. So we can see that building is a smithy. And at the back of the smithy, you've got what may be a grave and two bodies without heads. If you can see sort of two figures. Now this is very shallow limestone that's been carved very imprecisely, and then the paint is modern. The black paint is modern by the archaeologist Una Lindqvist. So, there's a lot of it's a lot of guesswork, but the house has a kind of sort of ornamented roof. We don't need to go talk about that, but it's clearly, just bear with me.
It looks like a hog shape to me. Yeah. I don't know if that
could be a hogback type style. Yeah. So you've got that, but the point is you've got two bodies without heads at the back. So we interpret that as the bodies of the king's sons. So this scene captures the retribution of Weland against the king's sons to the left. And on the right, there's a weird connection of two images. There's a sort of flying shape coming out of the building, two wings and a tail feathers, and then the head.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, right? I see that.
And it's pushing into the back of a woman, and the woman is in a classic styled Viking aristocratic dress. Mm-hmm. She's got a long trailing skirt, and she's got a pigtail and a long braid down the back of her back, down her back. So what? There's different. We're going to come on to this again, but I'll leave it that this is Weland. Just believe me, and this is Weland carrying off the king's daughter. Okay, that's the traditional interpretation. I'm not convinced. I mean,
how else do you depict it if not like that? I guess.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think it's something else going on here, but I'll come on to explain why. I think people have tried to be a bit romantic with this and say, oh, he's carrying off the king's daughter like Lois Lane and Superman type. He's carrying her off to seduce her. I don't think he's doing that at all. I'll give you a clue. I think something else is going on here. He's killing the king's sons. I think this is a stylized representation of sexual violence. That he's actually consuming her as a raptor around her midriff. But I can back that up a little bit. It sounds a bit weird, but I think we can back that up a little bit when we look at the English material, which has tended to be interpreted in a bit of a sort of family-friendly Victorian way as Weland carrying off the king's daughter. But I think he's doing something else when we see the English material. But this is the object.
It could be us applying a bit of modesty to things, which I think we probably do naturally, and that we kind of look maybe for a nicer thing rather than always confronting what
But
could
given
be.
what we know now historically and archaeologically about how northern aristocratic men were obsessed with falconry, hawking, and we have a anti-hero who's enacting retributive violence by slaying and making jewels out of king's sons' bodies, and is seducing the daughter. I think perhaps now, as a raptor, not simply as a bird, but as literally a bird of prey, like he would grab a dove or grab a goose. A bird. He is therefore this pushing into the midriff, or as a bird, could be seen as nothing short of violent consumption of her body, without putting
Okay.
too fine a point on it. And that sounds like a very
Hmm.
weird visual euphemism, but I think it makes sense with the English material, which we see in the Leeds and other sculptures, where we see this scene. Now, there's other Gotlandic picture stones that may show Weland, but we don't need to go that. We can actually now go to look at the Leeds and other Yorkshire
Okay.
monuments if we can. I
Yeah,
don't know if
absolutely.
you've got
So,
any images, or I can share images. I don't know how I can do that on Riverside though.
d- so it should be a little box if you have it in
Yeah, I
the
do.
bottom right that just says share. It's the same as it would work the same as Zoom. That's interesting what you said about
Oh yeah.
the consuming, because they we don't see it today, but obviously there is a huge connotation between birds, particularly like eagles, ravens, picking at battlefields, picking at dead animals, picking at dead bodies. They are the consumers of human flesh regularly, and it is it's seen in the kennings, the use for them. So that idea might be quite foreign to us, but to them at the time it wouldn't be, because obviously death is a where you can go your whole life and never see a dead body, or if you do, if you're lucky, hopefully maybe in an open casket situation, hopefully you never come across one out in the wild. But if you do, you would be considered unlucky, and maybe only once. Whereas 1,000 years ago, it's not uncommon. It wouldn't be a shock to see bodies and blood and gore and animals eating that. Whereas to us now, it's graphic, isn't it? The idea of a fox finding somebody and eating them is very abhorrent.
Yeah, exactly. And if I may just take you through what I'm showing you here, and this helps to make the point I'm making, that this image of a bird man grasping at a woman. The photograph on the left is the Leeds Museum, 19th century family friendly version of the scene, showing Weland. That's the composite, but I think the actual pieces we have show something very different. So this is, I think. No, hang on, I've got my. This is from the image. The main image is from, I think, Richard Bailey's work, who's one of the experts of early medieval Anglo-Saxon stone sculpture. And if you look at E, that's his composite of what the different fragments from different stones might be showing us. Bottom left, F is Ardra, where we saw that in Sweden, right, from the island of Gotland. But A,
Mm-hmm.
B, C, and D are the different fragments of the scene that different scholars are saying are elements of the scene of Weland abducting the king's daughter. Now, if he is abducting her, I would point out that that image on the far left that's in the museum is utterly misleading, because it's just putting like little light tendrils around her waist, and the grasping looks quite almost benevolent. But if you look at the scenes that we actually have fragments of, we've got B, from Leeds Museum, is just the bottom scene, so we don't have anything at the top. C, from Sherborne, shows the bird beak grasping at the woman. But the main scene is A, which is from the Leeds Cathedral, Leeds Minster. It's called Leeds Parish Church on this image, but St Peter's,
Mm-hmm.
where you get even though it's not well drawn, and I'll show you some photographs I've taken, which I think show it much clearer, you've got a very graphic and disturbing scene. What Bailey fails to do is show that on the Leeds Minster A, we do have the bird's beak, and it's even clearer what's going on. So if I can quickly skip on, I'll just go past these ones.
It is.
Okay.
It's fascinating, I think, how, because I we do kind of a similar thing. We have a fascination of going and seeing these stone sculptures, and I'm sure you've noticed it much more than I have, that when you put your, even just a mobile phone up to something to look at it, as soon as you look at it through the mobile phone screen, things just become so much more clearer. And I don't know if it's the camera that's
It's
doing
all
it, or
about the
maybe modern
light, and
technologies
I put a,
working
I mean,
with it,
this
but
is going to be
they
a
just
lot easier
kind
now,
of
Dan,
pop.
when we get photogrammetry and we get much better laser scanning. I'm not a professional photographer, but I've spent a lot of time trying to get the lighting right in the dim conditions of the church to get these photographs. So I'm sharing with you these now as not a professional archaeological photographer, but a pretty decent photographer who took a lot of time trying to get this sorted. And what you're looking at is, I've turned it 90 degrees, so you're looking at the woman as if she's standing up. I don't know if you can see my cursors. Can you see my cursors? Yeah. So,
Uh, I I can't, but I found that if you click on the image, it should bring the cursor back, and then
oh damn, no, it moves it
maybe
along.
does it? Oh, okay. No, it's okay. I
Anyway,
can't.
what you've got.
I can't see it, but it's okay.
Okay, so let me describe what you're looking at here. So you're seeing this is a heavily damaged stone. So that middle bit is all just plastering in to fill in the gaps. But you've got the body of the woman. You can see the beak of the bird that's gripping her around her
Sorry
waist.
to interrupt. Everybody else can see your cursor, so feel free to
Oh,
use the cursor
right, brilliant, thank
for
you.
the audience.
So there is the beak of the bird. That's all that survives, and that is a huge hooked beak of a raptor that's literally chomping on her waist. Meanwhile, you can see her head up here. You can see her nose and eye, and her hair trailing back, which are being gripped by the hand of Weland. So here's Wayland's hand coming out from his flying machine and
Ah,
grasping her by
okay.
the back of her neck. Meanwhile, his other arm down the bottom here is coming out and his hand is gripping the trails of her skirts. So this woman is being pinned in a violent way by three gestures: two hands gripping her hair and her trailing skirts, and a huge, giant raptor beak consuming her midriff.
I mean, this looks as though she's
It's not
been
nice.
bitten in
Yeah.
half. Now, is that on purpose, or is that just how it's weathered?
Well, maybe this is a different version of the story that we don't have. Maybe this isn't Wayland. Maybe we can create some other legend for this. But if this is a version of the Wayland story, this woman is not receiving a very courteous and kind introduction. But what's also important is she is doing something we never see on any other stone sculpture or representation of an aristocratic woman. Aristocratic women in this style, from Merovingian or just pre-Viking and Viking art, are always proffering a drinking horn. This lady is knocking it back herself. And if you look at it's very unclear, but she's got the horn curving in front of her with her head back, and she
Oh,
is imbibing the drink. So that this huge mead or ale horn, she is consuming. So she is in an act of consumption, of intoxication. And I think I've got
and they
another
do
version
mention
of,
that in the story, right?
yeah. So hang on, let me show you. This is a different lighting showing you the same thing. You can see the horn
Yeah, you can see the horn
curving.
now.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very stylized, very heavily damaged, right? So her head is simply an eye, and you can't really see much there. This is the back of her hair. That's her face, and there's the drinking horn to her mouth. It's very damaged, right? I'm not saying we have all of the understanding here, and of course, this would have originally been vividly painted. And this is her skirts
Yeah,
being grasped here, and there's her feet.
I think
Her second
I
foot
think
is
that's
cut off.
one thing just for the audience in general that we need to remember, that a lot of detail would be lost just through the painting. You know, we
Of course.
have an image, but we could never even hope to really dream of the details that are then on top of that, and which would give so much context to the stories. You know, these weren't made to necessarily be looked at
No,
without the pain, so it makes
no.
it so much more difficult for us to then interpret. And I also think it's fair to remember that, again, with any story that we've ever discussed on here from the Viking Age, whether it's, you know, the creation myth or to any of them, there are different versions to these stories depending on what time period, who told it, where you're telling it, even just down to who the scold or the jester or whoever was
Absolutely.
performing it that evening. It could have altered. So there's not going to be just one story, and especially as we said at the top of the show, the amount of places that Wayland pops up, they're
Yeah.
all going to have little variations, little differences. So just because something doesn't fit 100% to the one
Uh,
story we have written down doesn't mean that it's not going to be him or just another slightly different one. You have to
but,
find the through lines where you can.
so there is the standard interpretation of this is that this is Wayland carrying off the king's daughter. But the problem is, in the versions we have, he doesn't do that. So that may be simply that this is a different version we don't have, or this is trying to symbolize something else. And all I'm suggesting is that this is a almost like she's consuming alcohol and simultaneously she is being consumed. She's consuming and consumed. She is both the she is being consumed by Wayland in bird form. So it does suggest kind of really sinister. You're not. I think
Mm-hmm.
whatever the particular spin you make on this, you're not supposed to go away thinking this was anything consensual or pleasant, right? Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I
uh,
don't know
and,
why
and
the grabbing of the hair just feels quite
yeah,
evil. There's just something
yeah,
about that I
it's
noticed on one of the earlier pieces that it's just a bit, it's uneasy, doesn't it?
so if you go back to the stylization that was constructed for this image, it's bad enough. But if you think about it, that was what I showed you here. And with all those details added, suddenly we're getting a much more violent scene of a bird man consuming his prey as a hawk would consume a pigeon. You know, it's very
Mm-hmm.
predatory. It's absolutely predatory. It's not even trying to be
Yeah, it
ambiguous.
is.
Um, so
Mm-hmm.
rather than flying away in some kind of romantic Superman moment, this is an act of violent consumption of a female body, which I think, if you think these sculptures were on Christian art and the Leeds cross may have actually had a female patron, it may be commemorating a female abbess, then suddenly this becomes like the ultimate sort of moral juxtaposition of godly Christian woman, you know,
Mm-hmm.
either a mother or a holy woman, and therefore chaste, and a scene of rapacious violence on the art, which is, you know, something that wouldn't go down well with modern sensibilities across Christian faith,
Mm-hmm.
but was something that definitely early Christians were more than happy to show those juxtapositions and draw on traditional stories to do so. So, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's really interesting stuff. And I thought this would just be a little case study of how we can't say, don't have all the answers, of course. And all those provisos you said are absolutely important. I'm not giving you a definitive view. I'm just saying maybe, could be, you know, but this suddenly gives us a different sort of tenor to or tone to the what we're looking at in this art. And it's something very much about the moralities of lordship, bad lordship versus good lordship, and Wayland's going to get you if you're either an
Mm-hmm.
improper woman or your father and your lord or your king is not a good model of king of lordship, of kingship. And so I think it's all about
Mm-hmm.
morality and codes of honor and codes of retribution, and that's all I think really fascinating. And this would be while there are differences, of course, between Scandinavian world, the Franks, the Frisians, the Anglo-Saxons, or whatever you want to call them, all these peoples are sharing in stories, and they're sharing in some very core codes of behavior that these stories would have resonated with over the
Mm-hmm.
centuries, not at one moment, but over centuries. And I think that's just really cool.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the world is different today. So it's a slower pace in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. You know, we live in a 20-minute news cycle, um, but just everyone just take a second to think about telling a story today, and then in 200, 300 years, that same story is still being told and resonating true with people, because they must, as much as it's a story, it has to be entertaining. To survive that length of time, it must have some undercurrent of, like you say, a real morality or real lesson,
Yeah,
or something really deeper to the culture to
yeah,
survive that long. And then even to be, maybe not even just to a culture, to humanity in general at that time, because it has spread throughout different cultures within Europe, and survived, and maybe been tweaked to suit each one on a
yeah.
surface level. But there must be something to that core story that rings true to everyone. Of, don't hamstring the Smith.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
Smiths were passing this around. They were like, "We got
yeah.
to keep this story alive because we don't want to be captured."
Well, I mean, this could be seen. We can easily. I mean, some scholars will obsess with that, making this purely about Christian morals of female sainthood and piety. And early Christian saints, female saints, it's all about a lord wanted her as his wife, and she decided it'd be better to have her lose her head, but it miraculously grew back. Or at the last moment, lightning struck the man, and but
Mm-hmm.
you can see this in purely Christian terms. But I think it's much more honest to see this as part of a much broader set of stories that would have secular as well as religious connotations in terms of power, artisans, and conduct beyond simply a narrow Christian parable.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, we mentioned it earlier, that it could, you can always look at these things and probably overanalyze them. You can be looking for something that what's the
True.
real deep meaning. But it could also be a case of that, you have a group of people that undeniably, when it comes to blacksmiths or anybody who's making like bronze items, jewelry, anybody with a real smithy skill is a real asset to society, and would be heralded as, a as a top part of that community, and people would want to protect them, but people would also want their skills and would want to abuse that if possible. So it could be a story of kind of, you don't mess with these people who, at the time they are making really vital pieces of whether it's a tool, whether it's,
Yeah.
whether it's just the clamps or a sword or an axe, or even just the fork that you're going to eat with, or the tripod that you hang your pot off, or the pot itself. These people, their skills are so important that it's like, don't fuck with the Smith. Maybe it's
Well,
that simple, of just don't
your
mess with the
life is in
Smith.
the hands of the mechanic who last looked at your car if you drive a car, or the bike, the
Mm.
person who last mended the bike, or the train you get on. We're all in reliance of the artisan and the mechanic. But we, in a capitalist world where we commodify out and give a low value to that labor, we don't
Mm-hmm.
we don't honor it in the same way. But in a world where your survival through the winter depended on how much you ploughed and whether the plough was effective, or the bridle on, whatever it may be, or your battle, and the reliability of your weapons. This was a world where those things, it's difficult, even if you saw them as purely practical purposes and technologies, and you understood how things were made, you'd still want to invest them with some kind of, you know, you don't want it messing up, and you don't want to narc
Yeah.
off the person that made it, And the
No.
Beedale. This is where I just want to quickly wrap up with for at least for what I wanted to say about the Beedale
Yeah. Yeah.
hogback, because the Beedale hogback has, I don't know if you can see it, but these are the tail feathers. This is one of these Weland flying machine figures. We don't have all of it, but it has been speculated by I think it's Elizabeth Coatsworth who wrote about this, that the end of the hogback, and it's only a hogback because it's a coped gravestone, so you've got the roof-like figure. There's no end beast, but instead there's what seems, and I'm more than happy for you to say, Howard, that's bollocks, I can't see any of this. But one argument is you've got a guy sitting here on a throne holding a large arced object. And one argument is that
Banana.
is that Nidhad on his throne with the king's silvered goblet that is one of his son's skulls.
Oh, okay.
or not. But my point is, if we had these objects whole, if they hadn't been trashed in later centuries and we'd lost, we would have so much. I think there'd be other scenes we'd interpret differently. So have you got here a stone that on different faces, and this is a guess, if we had the whole thing, would on different sides tell different parts of the same story,
Would it
and
be
that
the
this
whole
is
story? Yeah.
another scene that we don't have anywhere else of the king sitting there receiving the bad gift, and maybe there'd be a juxtaposition as with the Frank's casket of a good king receiving a good gift on the other side. I don't know, but there's so much we don't know. But I thought, just to it's tantalizing. The Sherburn example, you got the tail feathers only and the wings. There's and this is the Sherburn 3 again. You got the head of Weland here, and there's the beak biting at the woman's midriff, but it doesn't go in the Leeds Cross one. It goes over her midriff, but here it's biting into her. And there's so he's
Yeah.
almost like he's got two heads. It's a really weird, disturbing, violent scene, in my opinion. Not a benign scene. But anyway, that's
No.
all I wanted to say, and I thought that'd be of interest.
No. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely love that. Let's I think that we've covered it pretty well. Let's wrap up the main show and then we'll do like maybe 15 minutes, let people ask you some questions if you've got time.
Of course.
Wonderful. Yeah. So if you want to hear more from Howard, pop over to our Patreon.com/Nordic Mythology Podcast, and you'll get this bonus episode, but then you'll also get every bonus episode we've ever done before this. So you've probably got over 100 at this point to go out. So if you like an episode, there will be that bumper part to it. Howard, thank you so much. This has been a pleasure as always. I'm sure this won't be the last time we speak. We need to go and visit some of these places in person. I say it every time, and I'm slack on my end. I will admit that here on the podcast. That sometimes I get
Busy.
caught up in life. So yeah, we do need to go and see something because I think it would be really fascinating. But where can people find you? What's your
so I'm on. You can find me on both social media as Archaeodeath, or find me via Archaeodeath. I'm on TikTok as Archaeodeath, YouTube as Archaeodeath, and I have a WordPress blog called Archaeodeath, which you can. And I've done some posts with photographs of these images. If you just search within my blog for Weland, you'll find some of the images. So yeah, I that's what I do online, and so do follow me if you have time.
Perfect. I know it's a bit late in the show, but if you have got this far and have not gone over to YouTube to look at the images, go over to YouTube and look at all the images that we pulled up, because they'll hopefully make the episode make more sense. If not, then I don't know what else I can do, because they really would help. But thank you for listening. For me, it's Daniel_Farrand1 across the board, Horns of Odin for the business, and then just Nordic Mythology Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever else we are. But that's it. Wonderful. Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.